On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Curtis Northcutt. He's the CEO and co-founder at CleanLab. We're going to be talking about Curtis's journey as a founder. We're going to touch on some interesting trials, tribulations he's gone through, and what led him to CleanLab. And we're going to talk a little bit about where CleanLab fits in within the world of AI and Gen AI solutions. Talk a little bit about agentic AI as well. Going to try to jam in as much as we can. Curtis, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, happy to be here.
Absolutely. All right, CleanLab. Tell everyone what you guys do over there.
At a high level, we add trust to the inputs and outputs of AI systems. Happy to dive in more.
Absolutely. Okay, so I guess we'll get to CleanLab. We'll kind of fast forward at some point and catch up to what you guys are doing now. But I think when we first spoke, we talked about your background. We talked about your journey into being an entrepreneur. And I thought it was really interesting and unique because obviously, every founder has some particular story about them. In your case, you actually, have a very interesting journey from academia, from your upbringing. And I guess maybe we're going to go back a little bit on the dial here, but can you tell us a little bit about just your upbringing? Because obviously, you mentioned an interesting environment in which you grew up. You didn't anticipate ending up at MIT, didn't anticipate some things, but obviously there's that help you kind of grow.
I guess one way to start that type of conversation is an observation. When I got to San Francisco, so I did my PhD at MIT. I was there for 8 years. I was in a lab, I think was like nearly 100% folks from India and China, mostly immigrants. I was very upset, for example, when that ISIS or whatever it was came out for like the week before it was repealed, because a lot of fantastic researchers that I worked with are all international. So I spent those 8 years in an environment. I was in the quantum computing lab. I worked with Isaac Chuang. He was my PhD advisor, and he's best known for inventing the quantum computer. And so my formal training is as a scientist in terms of the fundamentals of the universe. How do we discover them? That's what I'm interested in. That's where my intellectual curiosity comes from. And how do we replicate that and build that and develop that is a very interesting concept to me. How do we create intelligence? And so that's how I got into the field of AI many years ago. I share all that, even though it's different than your question, because there's some commonalities that you think about when you're a founder in San Francisco or you're a PhD student from MIT. And those commonalities are sort of this concept of like, who is your crew? And I think the concept for folks who are founders or who have worked with founders or are interested in being a founder, of founders being very lonely, is like a very real concept. Or this concept of like, it's lonely at the top is a very real concept. And I think that empathy is like one of the most helpful things. Gratitude is probably even more helpful. But one way that I think this story can help people in that position to have a little bit more empathy on both sides is, I'm a white male and I'm 6'1". I've got blue eyes and blonde hair. And I think I'm from America. I was born in Kentucky. And I think people see that story and they think of a certain persona. What I think they don't know when they see that type of a biography is I'm the son of 3 generations of mailmen. If I had been a mailman, I would be the 4th generation of mailmen in my family. My mom's salary is below $20,000 and she still works today in a call center. My family's from rural Kentucky. My grandfather grew up in the mountains in West Virginia. People who I went to high school with, they did not go to Stanford and MIT. They went to jail. And so I just have a very different background. And when I got to MIT, I was really hoping to find other people like me. And I was actually incredibly lonely because I didn't meet anyone else whose parents were making $20,000 a year, who were from rural Kentucky and grew up with a family who proudly calls themselves rednecks. And then I went to one of the most liberal areas in the United States and arguably in the world, San Francisco. And I have never felt sort of more isolated as a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes. And yet it's something that there really is no space to talk about. And there is no space to have a platform for because of a lot of reasonable historical privilege things, and also the type of community and sort of the culture that has manifested in the West Coast for several decades. But the reality is that if you go into a room full of founders and you ask someone to raise their hands, are you from China? You'll have lots of people raise their hands. Or are you from India? You'll have lots of people raise their hands. Or are you from California? You'll have tons of people raise their hands. But how many people will raise their hand who are from rural Kentucky? And I've been here now over 3 years, and I haven't really met anyone. And so I have a chip on my shoulder for the person from Middle America. I have a chip on my shoulder for the kid, from Nebraska, the girl who grew up and she wanted to do something with her life, but maybe she, doesn't fall into like your typical bucket of like the type of group that has a lot of support for it. But she's just from like a poor family in Middle America. And I think there's this massive group of people that's in the 90% that are sort of being ignored a bit right now by cities. And I think cities tend to focus on cities and city problems, but actually, like I lived in India for half a year. I've been all over the world, and most people are just trying to like find food and housing and basic things. And if you go to India or you go to the Philippines or really like most countries, you'll notice that people are like building their houses with sticks today in 2024. But people in California and the problems that they think about, they just have no idea. And so the loneliness of being someone who genuinely wants to be connected to the 90% of humanity and help that group of that population, the majority of people, it's a severe loneliness. And it stems from the fact that the San Francisco and Bay Area population tends to be on average highly privileged in terms of their background. And so there's a lot to unpack there. I think the one thing I'll sort of stop with is that if you consider these these areas and how to, like, how do you make change? Like, how do you do good? Like that sounds more, it sounds more of like there's a problem, but like, what are the solutions? Like, how do we do good with it? And I think that a lot of it just comes from having more founders in positions of power who have monetization resources to be able to provide those resources to products and services that take into account the 90%. And that's something that I try to do every day and everything that we think about. And you'll get that in both my life story and also the company that we've built.
Fascinating background, fascinating observations. I think it's an interesting observation because, as you mentioned, if you go to India, you go to the Philippines, you see people in the middle just trying to get by. And I think a majority of people in the country obviously would probably fit into that category. For you, you obviously found a way from going rural Kentucky to MIT to founder in the Bay Area. What was different for you? Obviously, you mentioned that a lot of people that you grew up with, maybe the end outcome for you would have been a fourth generation male person or potentially jail. I mean, there's a lot of scenarios you kind of mentioned, but obviously it didn't turn out that way for you. And I think there's something to be learned there because I think a lot of people who have that background that they don't have parents that have achieved different milestones might not see that, might not know what's available to them. What was different for you?
I think there's a qualifier required before answering that question. And the qualifier is there are two types of people who are sort of born in underprivileged areas or like less represented areas or low economic areas. And I think most of us can agree, especially in California, that rural Kentucky is a low economic area with respect to the United States, not with respect to the world. And the caveat, the condition to make sure that is considered is that there's one type of founder who sort of writes the story on LinkedIn that gets all the likes and everything about how hard their life was growing up. But then you go and have dinner with them and their family today in 2024. And their family today lives in a pretty big house in the burbs in California. And they worked for it. And it's an amazing, story of like the promise of America. But that's where their family is today. And I think a very different sort of founder is one whose family today is still pretty messed up. That tells you that the level of hardship that they were born into was kind of a different level, where they experienced that throughout the duration of their entire life. And even today, I'm in my 30s now. The hardship of home still comes back. It's something that I can't sort of walk away from. Even at this age, I can't go, I don't have a home that I can go home to that's like a happy big home. My family doesn't own a home, just so we're on the same page. Both of my parents do not own a home. They have rented property, duplexes. That's where my life, that's where I'm from today at this moment in time, even after being on this planet over 30 years. And I think that's just a very different type of like background. and often very rarely articulated. So that's, I think, one thing to think about. Now, how do you get into a position where you can have influence and power? I think there's a lot of things I had that actually I would consider them rich, not monetarily, but like I had really good foundational principles from my family and from my father in particular. I had the love of my mother. I think these things were extremely valuable. My mother never judged me. She still never judges me. So if I told her, hey, I want to build something crazy, I want to build rockets, I want to go to the moon, she would support me. If I told her I want to be a rapper, a professional, artist, she would support me. If I told her I want to do just whatever it was, and that's a rare gift. I'd say that in itself is something very few people have that I had. I know that's a strategic advantage. I know that was a gift. It's a massive privilege to have that, and I'm grateful for that. My father he still is an extremely principled person. The complexity of that relationship is not one to get into in a podcast, but he's a very principled man. And I think his principles were very helpful for me. He's definitely a man of the 90%, working class, 30 years of labor, of hard labor, carrying a satchel. He was a walking mailman, not a driving mailman. So he carried the weight on his back, on a strap across his shoulders. He came home every day, my whole life beat, just beat, hot sun. I'm from Kentucky. So imagine the hot South carrying, a heavy satchel. And I just saw my father come home every day beat, and he's just a very strong man. He's 6'4", just beat up by the labor of life. And I think seeing him come home and show up for me every day for my life with principles of, I'll share them with you. So here's some of the guiding principles I used that he taught me that helped me succeed. One is whatever you do, be the best at it. This is a lot. For some people, they consider that not good parenting. And of course, this is all subjective, but I found that very useful. And so whenever I did anything, I always tried to be the best at it. I understand that's competitive. I understand some people may view that as external validating, but I enjoy the competition, and I liked that principle. He always said, be where you're supposed to be. If you got a meeting, be there. If you're supposed to be in school, be there. If you've got a job, be there. But show up where you're supposed to be. He had some other things that were, I thought, really helpful. For example, I got the idea of the snowball effect kind of from him, but also something I developed myself, which is if you have nothing, then go for the smallest, lowest hanging fruit. And often when you grow up in an impoverished or a low economic area, you will actually have no opportunity. And so it's a massive advantage for you because you have freedom of thought. If you're someone who's born like if anyone, I like rap music. So if anyone listens to Eminem, imagine being Haley Jade, okay? And all the opportunities she must have had. It's really hard for her to know what to do. Now imagine being a poor person from rural Kentucky. There's no opportunity. So it's not hard at all to know what to do because nothing comes your way. So when something comes your way, you put all your resources into it. So the first thing that came my way was a cafeteria scholarship for $500 to go to college, and it would give you a $500 benefit for whatever your tuition was for college. I know that sounds ludicrous to people who are paying $80,000 a year, but I'm from Kentucky and college is cheaper there. So I applied for that and I got it, of course, because who would apply for that? And it turned out no one else submitted an essay. And so I got my first scholarship, when I was 16 or whatever in high school. And I just kept doing that. I then did another college program, another one. And then when I was able, after many, many steps, I was able to get ability to do research at University of Kentucky. And it's so funny to talk about that now after spending 8 years at MIT, that I was so excited to get an opportunity to do research at the University of Kentucky. But for me, that was all there was. And so I worked with someone named Robin Cooper. He was a fantastic professor there. And I just kept asking him over and over, how do I get more opportunity? Like, how can I get into physics and chemistry and mathematics? And he told me things he didn't know. He just mentioned some biology things. That's what he worked in. But after 6 or 7 months of me pestering him for opportunity, he shared with me something, this online community that NASA had just launched that he heard about, that someone had told him about, that if you helped people answer complex physics questions, high school level, and you were sort of one of the most contributing in the community, that there would be an internship offered to the highest contributor in that community to work at NASA. And I had no other opportunities really in life. And so I worked very hard in that community and I got that internship. And it was notable because it was during the time of affirmative action. And so there weren't too many people like myself who were able to get that internship. And for me, it was everything. I had no money, had no opportunity, and there was nothing else I really could have done like that. And it changed my life. It showed me that you can work really, really hard and you can create opportunity for yourself, at least in the context of the American educational institution. Then I went to Vanderbilt. I used that opportunity to then get the next internship and the next one. I went to General Electric. I went to Microsoft. I won a coding challenge and was able to scrap a Microsoft internship as a program manager. I wanted to be a software engineer, but that's what they gave me. So I took what I could get. And I just was scrappy. Every single time I could get an opportunity, I used that opportunity to get the next one, the next one. I then used all those opportunities in my essay to get the National Foundation Scholar it's called the GRFP, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. Use that to then get into MIT. And I just kept doing this. So I hope that helps. Long answer.
I'm listening to each step, and you mention the low-hanging fruit, and I'm listening to how every step of the way you're very true to that. You literally took what you could get, you kept building on it. And I think generally speaking, a lot of people don't know where to start, and they complicate things and they make it so daunting that they don't know where to start. You actually had a self-realization early on, and you mentioned some of the principles your father shared, your mother's safety and security, but understanding just to take what's in front of you, because you mentioned you have no opportunity. I think that's not talked about enough. And I think actually more people, just generally speaking, would do best starting out to just take what's in front of them. I think in your case, obviously precipitated a growth that obviously flourished, and here you are. If you were to kind of look back and you were to kind of look at the way things have unfolded, and obviously you've mentioned where you grew up economically, in terms of, you mentioned empowering, is there something that needs to be done to share that opportunity with others? Because you mentioned no one else actually wrote an essay for that scholarship. And I guess that is interesting to me, because I'm sure there's other kids in rural Kentucky that might have written a scholarship, might not have known. What is, and again, it's a big question, so I apologize. I'm giving you a big question, so if you need time to answer, but what is the gap? I mean, how is awareness raised? Because I think this all translates to other ethnicities, other demographics, other countries, other regions. This awareness of what you just said, it can be replicated, but obviously some just don't even know.
Yeah, so definitely a big problem. And I think it's critical that I share that my personal experience is personal. And a lot of what I shared is, there's so many different journeys, right? So I'm coming from rural Kentucky. I got to where I got, and that's just such a specific path. And there's somebody else who is born into a very wealthy family, but their parents didn't treat them well. And like that person, they need a lot of help too. And there's somebody else who it's just, something about the way they're born or what they look like. They've been treated a certain way that's unfair their whole life. And like, I think, first of all, it would be crazy to not acknowledge that every single person has pretty serious and various level amount of adversity. So that's like an obvious statement we can all agree on and start with. So when I share, I'll share about mine, but I will try to give you a good answer. So I think about the people who make the decisions often have money, and that's because money and power are tied together, because you can use money to get power and you can use power to get money. And because of this, it turns out a lot of times the people who are making policies, it requires a lot of money in order to get in a position where you can get and do these sort of policy making, call the shots type positions. And I think that what that ends up doing is, it just means that, at least for me personally, in the place I'm from, often legislature policies and the stuff happening from the top, and also in industry, a lot of it's coming from cities, and it's coming from affluent communities that really just don't know anything about someone from rural Kentucky. They don't know about, a girl growing up in the plains of Nebraska. And I think a lot of people learn what they learn from movies, actually. And it's hilarious because the movies are not even close. There's some movie called like Hillbilly Elegy or something. I was hanging out with somebody and they told me I've got to watch it. It's all about someone from Kentucky and the hardships they overcame. And they kept telling me how much they understand my life because of that movie and how the hardship is so hard. And I watched that, and that movie is easy. That is an easygoing life, like relative to the stuff that's actually happening in places like the Tug River Valley, that are always underreported because it doesn't make money. That stuff doesn't. There's no good ad revenue to make off journals written about those areas, and like the areas around Mammoth Cave, and there's just so many areas of Middle America that are totally undercovered in news and media representation. But there's literally millions of people who live there, and the people who are making a lot of decisions just tend to not know that much about those. So I think that's the problem. And I think the way that it has to be addressed is a few things. Or let me share one more example because it's critical. It's a really good example. So when I was in high school, I did not know, for example, that, and I think there's a lot of high schoolers who still don't know this, that, in fact, I actually think most high schoolers don't know this. And that's that if you grow up in a poor area, and you apply to a place like Vanderbilt University, which is where I went for undergrad, that they will pay, in most cases, nearly 100% of all your tuition for you, and room and board, and feed you amazing food. And when I went to Vanderbilt, that was the first time every day, 7 nights a week and 7 lunches a week that I got to eat vegetables. Which I'd never done before. And suddenly my muscles grew, my face got healthier, my skin got clearer, and it was amazing. It changed my whole life. But I had no idea. Like when you're growing up in rural Kentucky, there's no counselor who sits with you and is like, hey, you, and I went to high school in Lexington. So I grew up in rural Kentucky. In high school, I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. So I'm now considered the second biggest city of Kentucky. And I had no counselor who was like, if you just apply to this place and you happen to get in, if your income is below like 60K or whatever, they're going to feed you really well and you're going to be way healthier. Like no one tells you that. And I just didn't know. I also didn't know that the Common Application, which is a way that you can submit your application to college to 4 different universities, allows you to just click a button, pick 4 other universities and hit submit. And so if you're submitting to one, you can, for no additional cost, submit to a few others or some small additional cost. And so that's what I did. I ended up getting into Vanderbilt because of that, because it didn't cost me anything extra. And I already had to pay to use the Common App to apply to Kentucky. And that's how I got into Vanderbilt. And then I got an email that blew my mind that said, oh, by the way, it's free. And that was when I found out how the system actually works. No one told me, no one let me know. I had no idea. And it blows my mind because if I had just known that when I was even like 15, I could have potentially increased my chances or had other schools and opportunities on my radar. Okay, so how do you address it? I think that by looking at the problems, you get a better idea of the solution. So that's why I tried to focus a bit more on the problem. I think counselors have to be better educated, and that's difficult because the counseling position is low paid, and it's sort of a very difficult and challenging position that most people don't want to do. There has to be a more incentivized program. I think things like OpenAI and Anthropic and the new chat interfaces and the future of Gen AI and where things are going, like agentic work, these are opportunities for the companies that are leading in this space to be able to inject, anytime you have a user in high school, ways to help support them and to say, hey, would you like to learn about actually opportunity and availability? Like you could imagine a world where we don't just figure out how to market and make revenue by injecting, Sonos speakers and Bose speakers, but actually because someone we know they're old, we give them the opportunity to potentially learn how they could go to high universities for free. I mean, that's not necessarily a viable world, and I doubt the investors, that Sam Altman's working with are pushing him to move OpenAI in that direction. But that surely would be a promising world. And so I think what we have to figure out is like, how do we incentivize the technologies that the youth use that to increase their awareness? Because it's too big of a human problem to ask all parents in America to educate better and to ask all counselors. So I think you have to start with the businesses that have the means and the distribution and the technologies that the youth are consuming and try to create more awareness through that. But I agree, it's a very difficult problem.
No, I mean, everything you said is just, obviously this is unique to you. And I love the fact that as we're talking, there are other dynamics, there are other situations that could be easier, could be harder. I think everyone has something. I think you've provided amazing insights into your journey, which are unique to you. And honestly, as I'm listening, I actually, of all the places you could have been from, I haven't been to every state in America, but I actually have been to Lexington, Kentucky. My brother played tennis, and there was a national tournament there. So Rupp Arena. I drove through Kentucky. I had to stop for gas in very small cities, and I could tell you, it was very eye opening. I grew up on the East Coast in the DC area. It was very eye opening, and you drive through these towns, and you're like, these are not towns you're used to seeing. And I think something you just mentioned, and I don't know if this is being done right now. And I think in your case, it's an interesting story because most tech firms, if you weren't a CEO of your own company, you would be working at one of the best companies in the world, doing pretty much whatever you'd want. I don't think there's a doubt that you would have any position you'd want to pursue. These same companies that all want the next you, I do wonder if there's a way they work together. And again, I don't know enough about policies. It might be happening. Somebody might message me and say that I just don't know. But I can't imagine there can't be some kind of grassroots effort to come into the school you went to talk to you about these opportunities. They have the funds. They have the desire to find people who want to take that next step. I don't know if that's happening, but you've mentioned everything you mentioned as a part of the solution revolves around education. And who better potentially than these companies that benefit from finding the next Curtis, who would otherwise, again, if you didn't go after it, I'm thinking about your story. I'm like, maybe you don't achieve any of this. You just stay in Kentucky. You do become a mailman, and we don't have this conversation. No one's going to hear about kind of what you had to personally go through to get to this point. I think that would be a huge loss for everyone out there.
I appreciate that. It's hard for me to comment on it, but I really appreciate the thought. I think one thing to consider. So I do go back to Kentucky and I talk to my high school. I do it as often as I can. I've probably done it 5 or 6 times. There's a faculty at Lafayette High School. His name is Mr. Matson. Zachary Matson is his full name, and I hope he doesn't mind that I shared that. I share it because he's an incredible guy. He's a good teacher. He's a good chemistry teacher. He really cares about the students, like genuinely. It's not, I think we all have an idea of when people talk on a podcast about a teacher caring about their students, but he's different. Like, he's intentionally hard on people because he knows it's hard to get out of Kentucky. And that's special. Like, he knows what it's going to take. And so he doesn't go easy on people who are capable. And he made me cry in his class, like within a couple weeks. He was very hard on me. And I talked to him after, I'm a kid at this time, I was like 16. And I talked to him after class and I was just like, why do you treat me like this? Like, I can tell you're treating me worse. And he was like, I think you're arrogant. I think you have a lot of growth needed. I think you know all the answers and all this stuff. And he just like beat me up, and I really resented him. And then I realized why he was doing it. He was doing it because he cares so deeply and so passionately. And it's people like that change the world. And they do it 10 students at a time, but when they do that, it changed my whole life, right? Because knowing that someone cared that much helped me care that much. And then I pass that on. And I think that propagation effect is often understated. I think teachers are highly underpaid and highly underappreciated. Good teachers. I think they're critical to child development. I think that if we had better parents, that would actually solve more problems in the world than any other problem. None of this AI stuff is going to do as much for the world as better parenting would. Even though I'm one of the most pro AI people in the world, I still believe parenting is a bigger problem. And I think teachers do their best to help what little they can, even though legislature constantly limits their capacity to do anything about it. And so I brought up Mr. Madsen because he's the one who hosts me. So when I go back to Lafayette, he gets the students together. He rents out the library. He gets multiple classes. And I just chat with them very candidly. Like, here, I was in your seat. I sat in this library. I knew what it was like to have no opportunity. And I won't say that I've made it or anything, but I believe fairly confidently that at this point in my life, I can do most of the things that I want to do. And that's a very different position than I was in when I sat in your seat. Here's how I did it step by step. I hope it can help you. And I wish I saw more people do that kind of thing. I think that would be a pretty cool world to live in.
Awesome, man. That's fantastic. Yeah, and not only are you aware of kind of what you had to go through, but giving back, I think that's amazing. I know we were supposed to talk about CleanLab and agentic AI, and maybe that's another episode. I did want to ask you one question, because as you've been talking about how you've kind of gotten to this point in life as a founder, as a CEO of an AI based company, you have different pressures and stresses. Obviously, you're very aware of where you're at as well in time and space, which I think is very valuable. How do you approach being a co-founder with an understanding that you know yourself and you know what you went through? What are some of the principles that have carried through as you in this role of a co-founder and CEO?
Yeah, constantly try to do two things: balance and growth. Balance is the hardest thing as a founder in general, but definitely as a co-founder. You never have enough time, and it's very easy because when stress goes up or when you're trying to make certain goals with multiple ambitious people, kindness is okay, but I think balance actually is even more valuable. And what does that mean? Like, it means that you can't do everything at once. So it's prioritization, it's picking your battles, it's how much do you work out and how much do you sleep and how much do you talk to customers and how much do you go to market. And I think that in almost everything retrospect, when I look back, I realized that the battle I was actually fighting was a battle of balance, and mastering that is mastering being a co-founder. I think if you can have gratitude, it's really helpful too. I'm extremely grateful for the work that my co-founders do as people. I appreciate them. And that helps me overcome the fact that we're actually very, very different. They're from fundamentally different backgrounds than I am. They think fundamentally differently about the world. They care deeply, deeply about the technology. I care deeply, deeply about the people. And because of that, we clash all the time. We actually fight all the time, and we barely agree on anything. What gets us through is that I am extremely grateful to them. I feel enormous gratitude. I respect them. And I always am trying to balance their needs and their requirements with my own. And I think that's how we pull through.
I could keep talking to you, but I know you got to get back to it. You got a business to run. Thank you for your time. Did not get to CleanLab. Obviously, agentic AI, maybe a second part. I think the conversation was great. I love the story. If somebody does want to learn more, either about you or CleanLab, where do we direct people?
You bet. Over 100 of the Fortune 500 use CleanLab. So it's pretty widely used. There's an open source package. It's around 10,000 stars on GitHub. Where people should reach out to us, though, if they want to jump in as a business and be able to improve both the reliability of things like chatbots, agents. Imagine when you're on the window on Azure.com or Zendesk or Salesforce, there's a million of them, right? And you try to use the thing, it almost never works that well. And you're like, you know what? Maybe this agent stuff is nonsense. CleanLab is the company that makes those things work. And so whenever you're encountering this type of problem, the way you'd reach out to us is just send an email to team@cleanlab.ai, or if you want to talk to someone who can help you buy the thing, sales@cleanlab.ai. If you want to check out the website, it's cleanlab.ai. But somebody will respond to you right away, and we'll help you out.
Awesome, man. We'll get some of those links in there for you. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate yours. Thanks.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. I know I said we're going to get into agentic AI. We're going to talk a little bit about what CleanLab does. I'm sorry. I know we didn't quite get into it. Curtis did leave us some links for you guys to definitely reach out to them if you want to learn more. Maybe we'll do a part 2 with Curtis down the road. But I really loved the story. I loved what his journey means and what he's learned and how aware he is. And he's carried that on into his co-founder and CEO role. So please share this story with somebody else. I thought it was fantastic. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how you like the podcast. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.